make sure I add some more the next one. And speaking of where we are, me in the black box and you in Florida, that's one of the things that Ken likes to know.
Yeah, we have a global audience. We have people that join us from the UAE occasionally, from the EU, from Britain. We got several people from Canada associated with the show today, probably including the Wes mom because he pays her to watch. That way we always have at least one viewer. So again, we always like to know. And if you're watching the replay, let us know on the replay as well, because we love to see how diverse our audience is.
We do, absolutely. And don't forget to ask your comments and questions as we move through. That's the great thing about live streams. We can answer them on the fly, and certainly happy to do so. So obviously, currently myself, I'm joining from lovely Crystal Beach on the shores of Lake Erie on the Canadian side, literally only 20 or 25 minutes from downtown Buffalo. And Ken, obviously, which part of Florida did we find you in today?
I am in Central Florida, just kind of south and a little bit west of Orlando.
Well, that's
far
great.
enough away I don't have to deal with Orlando traffic, but close enough I can get there if I want to.
So we're going to unbalance you today because our guest, actually, Jeff Skipper, who I'll introduce in a moment, is from Calgary, and he's an international change leadership consultant for organizations in energy, finance, tech, and other industries. And for over 25 years, beginning with a 12-year career at IBM, he's guided change projects by focusing on the people side of change. And as CEO, he grew a transformation services company to 7 figures in just 5 years. He and his family live in Calgary, Alberta. And his new book, which we'll get to a little bit in here, Dancing with Disruption, Leading Dramatic Change During Global Transformation, couldn't be any more timely. So welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Glad to be here with you, ready to level up.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. And certainly cannot thank you, enough, right? And as I said in the intro, disruption and dealing with that, we've had so much of it in the last few years. We're dealing with it both in our business lives, both in our socioeconomic lives, all of it, right? So I know that all of our viewers today will definitely be able to, to learn from this, right? Yeah. And I'm wondering if, there are 6 points basically that I wanted to move through. I found these quite interesting, right? Some key messages that you obviously coach people on. And the first one that I saw was creating motivational narrative around a singular goal. And maybe you can talk about that. What is motivational narrative and why just a single goal?
Yeah, of course. The reality is all of us are bombarded today. There's way too much stuff coming into our inbox. You go on to news or social media, there's just so much to try and sift through. So how do you break through that noise and tell people, we need you to do something different, go in that direction? So that first step is, I got to set out some kind of goal that's going to capture people's attention and answer basic questions. Number one, what? What is it you want us to do? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? And now that I have an idea that you need me to do something, okay, tell me why. Explain why we're doing that and what's in it for me. So it has to be something that really moves people. People want purpose, and the goal gives them that.
Yeah, it's fun. And there's an expression that I heard years ago, which always sticks with me and somehow finds its way into my conversation with people, right? And I know that I was looking on your website that, 1 year you did over 200 speaking engagements, right? And I would think after that many engagements, you probably learned this lesson as well, that everybody loves a story, nobody loves a sermon, right? And it is that story, that motivational narrative, if you will, which I totally agree with is so important, right?
So I want to throw in there, it's interesting how many leaders want to try and move people by giving them stats. So numbers, okay, yeah, we want to increase market share. Here's how we're going to do it. But you're exactly right. When we tell the story, one story about a customer whose life gets made better as a result of a change, that moves people.
It does, right? And I think that's one of the things that I've always loved. In kind of the preamble to the show, we were talking a little bit about the early days of the internet, right? And one of the things that I loved was when you can actually see a benefit of people starting to use some of these technologies to communicate in different ways, right?
That's right.
Like that real benefit for people saying, oh my goodness, like I didn't have a voicemail. I actually got to think about my thoughts before I put them into an email. Like watching that happen, those transformational stories, just incredible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you also, go ahead, Ken.
I was going to say, it's interesting because there's an adage in sales that ties right into that, and that is that facts tell, stories sell. And a lot of times we don't think about it in our business, but we need to sell our employees, those that we're working with, or even our peers, on whatever it is that we want them to, where we want to go. And again, go back to, we tell them the story of your what, where, why, and when, they start to then can buy into it, and they can start to believe in the story. They don't believe in facts, they believe in stories.
Well, we know that too because stories evoke emotion. That's really what the difference is. Numbers don't do that. They don't really inspire people as much. But when we hear about someone's journey or their success or how they overcome failure, that moves people. So I like to make sure people understand when we're trying to lead people through change, it's not just, okay, this is what you got to do. It's creating that emotional response that here's something positive that I want to get on board with.
Well, that's great. I want to make sure people know how they can find you. So I'm just going to take 1 second and actually show you the website. So you can actually visit Jeff. I'll make sure that the link is here at jeffskipperconsulting.com. And it's a great page full of some incredible information about what he does to help people through this disruption and building strategies for change. So you can visit that at jeffskipperconsulting.com. And I'm wondering if we can move into the next point now, actually. And one of the things I know is that when we're talking about getting people focused on a single thing, right? That singular goal, that sometimes there can be resistance. And that leads into the second point that I really like that you emphasize, which is, predict the most probable point of resistance. And how do you do that?
It's sounds like it might be complicated, and it's really not. All of us in our roles within organizations have a decent sense of how people will react to things. So when we look at the change that we want people to embrace, whatever it is, so we're rolling out a new technology, I'm moving people between office buildings, I want to assess that for each group on two dimensions. One is, how desirable is this change? So do you think they're going to see that as generally a thumbs up, thumbs down? So an organization I'm working with right now doing an office move, they're so tired of some of the challenges in their existing building. They're thrilled. They're like, don't worry about the change management stuff. We're packed up and ready to go tomorrow. How soon can we go? The second dimension is difficulty. And if I take that same example of the office move is, okay, great. Now what we need to do is go through everything and purge all the stuff you don't need because the space is going to be smaller. And then now we have a challenge. So although I've got desirability, the difficulty factor is going up. So when people can't see a clear path from where they are today to where they need to be, they see obstacles and there's risk that I might fail and fall on my face along the way. That's what creates resistance. And we need to be careful. It's not just that people are digging in their heels and saying, I'm not going to do it. Oftentimes it's about fear. So I like that. You've got up that phrase, where are you watching from? So where are people coming from? What's their perspective? You have to get inside their head, their shoes to determine how they're looking at this particular phrase.
Yeah, and it's different for everybody, right? And I think that's a very people-centric, kind of approach to trying to find out what that is, because that point of resistance could be very different, for you versus me, right? And, like you said, for the downsizing part, somebody might groan on that, right? And I will tell you that my wife is a collector and she attaches memories to most of the things that she collects, right? I, on the other hand, don't. So we have a very different perspective on kind of like, getting rid of things, right? And so I got to think that by, predicting those most probable points, you got to ask some pretty good questions.
Yeah, exactly right. And you can't just do it inside your office. So I said, all of us can kind of get a sense of, is it desirable? Is it difficult? But beyond that, you got to get out and talk to people. It's in that dialogue that you convince folks that, hey, this is a good thing. You get that emotional response, feeling positive, but also you learn a lot around what is their perspective and how can I help them through this journey?
That's right. And people can further understand how you can help them with their journey by visiting your LinkedIn page as well. I do have that up here. So Jeff Skipper on LinkedIn. I do have the URL there. So I'm not sure why LinkedIn has that /in and then they put your name. They do it for everybody, right? But there it is. Don't forget the in, and you get to get to see Jeff, there as well.
It's kind of interesting because when I teach service management, and one of the things that I talk to my service management students is about how to be able to, and I use the term, have the bullets in the gun when they go talk to their owner. Because if you're trying as a subordinate to affect change in an organization, you are starting to create, as you would say, a little bit of disruption. And the point of resistance is usually the owner, because, and I like what you said about fear, because they've always done it this way.
Yeah.
So they're afraid to change. But in our industry, and in fact, in the world today, being able to change is really hard. And one of the things I encourage them to do is to be able to go into their boss and be able to show them in black and white how their change is going to impact the company, and basically go walk in with a complete business plan, so that that person, you can start to alleviate some of his fears and show you've thought through the things that he might be afraid of.
Oh yeah, I want to know you've got an idea what the journey is like, because credibility is so important for me to get on board. Because even if I believe in that vision, if I don't respect you, or you don't have a track record of success, you start things and don't finish them, not easy for people to get on board. Both of those parts matter quite a bit.
Yeah. I think we're going to come back to the credibility a little later, because there's another label I'll put on that. But I think I saw it in a question.
Absolutely. And so let's move on, just in respect for your time and for that of our viewers, and maybe talk about leveraging leader capital and self-interest to align interests. So self-interest, oftentimes when you hear that, it sounds a little negative. So explain that. How are you leveraging leader capital and self-interest?
So first of all, these are related concepts. Let me start with leader capital. I'm doing work with an organization right now, and we're talking about who should really lead this change. And as you mentioned, Ken, we'll come back to this concept of credibility. But part of that is wrapped up in when leaders step up to the table, folks tend to listen. But if they do that continuously, they just become another person. So they lose that impact. So I'm constantly coaching leaders. You have to be really thoughtful, planful around when you're going to step up to the microphone and give it a push, use the stick or use the carrot, because over time it tends to lose its effectiveness. So we guard our leader capital very carefully. Self-interest is about making sure when I talk to people, I'm phrasing what I need them to do in terms that are most meaningful to them. So Wes, when I talk to you about a change, things that are important to you may not be the same as Ken. You're interested in, hey, I want to make sure there's stability for the organization over the long term, because that drives my job stability. Where Ken is looking for, is that an opportunity for me to develop and gain something new? And that's going to drive him. Very different. But both of them can help folks get in line with the change and say, yeah, I'm going to step up because I can see the benefit for me. So I've got to be very careful around how I craft my message for different audiences.
I really like that, and I appreciate the clarification. And so the self-interest is your people's self-interest. In other words, what is motivating them,
Right.
to move through their day. I love it.
That's right.
And so the term you used, leader capital, I talked to my managers about political capital, and I made the point that your credibility is really what you do. As you succeed, you gain more and more. When you fail, you lose some or maybe all of the credibility you have. So you need to make sure you've done your due diligence before you go in and tell the boss, hey, let's do this. Because if you say that and he does and it fails, you may be just trying to hold on to a job at that point in time.
You got it. So important. If I come and lead in with the wrong message, you start to discount me. You don't understand me. You don't know what's important to me. This conversation is kind of over. Yeah, great point, Ken.
All right. And that probably is a good one to move into the next point. And obviously, it's one thing to motivate people. It's another thing to focus on their self-interest to sort of direct them towards the change. How do we sustain it, right? When things do get tough, because I've often been involved in things where it's made very clear up front. It's like, look, before it gets better, it's going to get harder. Trust the process, right? That's one thing that I, really draw inspiration from, was people say, look, it's going to get hard. Trust the process.
Yeah.
So how do we sustain that change? Because I think that's the hardest thing, is when it gets tough, right?
Yeah, 100%. So there's two pieces in here that are quite critical. One is honesty, and it starts up front. Leaders need to be as transparent as possible around not only the journey, but what pain it's going to invoke. So as you guys well know, employees have a very strong BS meter. When you get up there and say, hey, this is going to be easy, we'll be there in a year, folks know that's not likely. And we recognize there's going to be problems along the way. So covering that up front to say there's going to be some challenges. We're here to help you get through it. It's number one. Second is cadence. So a regular communication with employees or whoever your stakeholders are. So regardless, we're going to have an update every Tuesday. Even if I have nothing new to tell you, we're still going to get together Tuesday and I can answer your questions. One of the reasons people don't understand why that's so important is because a structure gives people a sense of control. If you're trying to drive a change that makes me feel like, shoot, the future is uncertain, it feels a bit chaotic, but I know every Tuesday we're going to have an update, that creates some structure that settles nerves. So those two pieces, honesty and then a cadence of communication, both very critical for leading people.
Yeah, and I think it's important when you talk about that cadence. And I know, Ken, you could attest to this, right? That because we do this show every Wednesday at 11 a.m. And when we can't, we get people that come back to us and say, where were you guys today, right? And that they expect that consistency. And it's hard on us too, right? That when we can't do a show, if we're both traveling at the same time or, have other obligations, it's very difficult because, like you said, that consistency gives you a feeling of predictability and stability, right? Is stability another way to look at it?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Stability is good. People want that. Keeps them engaged.
Yeah. And I'll relate an experience that I had a company that I worked for. This was a major copier manufacturer. And all of a sudden, we lost the guy that had been running service, and they put a marketing manager over the service team. And you talk about a bunch of guys that started panicking because we knew his reputation. We had dealt with him from, the pushback we'd gotten, and there was no communication, nothing to reassure us. And in fact, the first communications we got was we started seeing guys that no longer worked for the company, and in my part, I started looking for a job immediately. Even though my job would have been safe, I couldn't deal with that uncertainty. And my belief in my mind is that this person was going to be very bad for the company. I believe that I was correct in my assumption, and I was glad that I jumped when I did. I had some other things that worked out as well. But when people are uncertain, they become fearful, and when they become fearful, they start thinking about leaving.
That's right. So fear drives resistance. It's often at the root of it, whether it's, I fear you're going to take away power. So we talk about technology changes. And when we do that, folks who are experts, they were the go-to people around, hey, I've got a problem with Excel. Can you help me? Now you change the tool and everyone's at the same level. So I no longer have that influence I had before. That generates fear. It's loss of power. So being able to, again, put ourselves in the shoes of those we're impacting and understand what's going to be valuable to them, where we need to involve them, is critical to determining where's the resistance going to be and how do we help them through it.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because we think about where we are today and you start looking at businesses. A good example of change that they're getting huge resistance to is bringing people back to the office. A lot of individuals are saying, if I have to work in the office, I'm finding another job, because they like the work from home environment. And it's not that they worked less, because there's, some statistics out there that show that in most cases they actually worked more than they did when they were at work. But the convenience of being able to work from home and deal with minor things that might come up is so valuable to them. You take it away and they're resistant.
That's a threat. Absolutely. Yeah, you're right, Ken.
Hey, I brought up one of your blogs actually, because it kind of, talks into that, right? As Ken just mentioned, this idea of the remote office and hybrid work. And I haven't read the blog yet, but I love the title, Managers Suck at Hybrid, Take a Ukrainian Approach. So what's that all about?
Well, this is really interesting because in the Ukraine, of course, with bombings happening, it forced people to work from other locations, often other countries. So Ukrainian managers had to adapt to that. This is the way we are going to work now. So they bent everything around hybrid work and how do I keep people engaged at a distance. Very different from when hybrid work began and managers were, well, this is going to last long. I'll just wait till people come in the office. I'll try and do things the same way I did when we were in person. It doesn't work that way. This is a different way of interacting. So you can see, that last model I put up there, as I said earlier, emotional distance. Just scroll down a little bit. We're trying to decrease the emotional distance between ourselves and our people. How do you do that? That is a new set of skills that most leaders do not have and needs to be developed.
Yeah, I think it's a really good example, actually. And I love how you talk about, that there was a necessity for change, right? And that it was difficult because of the war and the bombings and stuff where they had to do something, right? And I wonder
Right.
sometimes if maybe that's what we need to, to do is to get across better the necessity of, some of the changes that we're trying to do, right?
It comes down to this main truth. If we want people to do something different, fundamentally, we need to demonstrate that we care about them. Yes, I can coerce you into doing things, but you are going to find ways to dig in your heels and resist me. But when I demonstrate, Wes, I know it sounds cliche to say this, but this is really in your best interest. Let me demonstrate why. That changes the conversation. So this is fundamentally about care.
Yeah, it does, right? And that's one thing I've always said, that one of my greatest assets is also my greatest deficit, which is I have to love what I do, right? And great leaders that I've always worked with have found a way to show me the love in a great change that was going on in the organization, right? In other words, understanding that's where I come from, that I have to be passionate and find joy in the thing that I'm doing, right? So to frame it that way. And is that fair to say that for each person that we're dealing with, maybe we have to frame it to what you said earlier, to their self-interest, and make sure that it's clear to them personally, right?
Exactly right.
I love it. Hey, go ahead, Ken.
I was going to say, and I think that's a skill that leaders at every level need to learn. We talk about that in my class as well, because if you go in and you just be the boss. In fact, I teach them to stop being bosses, be leaders. And there's a really nice chart that I found that highlights the differences. But a leader is somebody that cares about his people. And people, I love the adage that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yes.
And then, so it's showing that you, at an individual level, that you care about them, you care about their goals. I talk about that in mentoring. I say, that you need to, as a leader, you want to mentor all of your people. And some of those people you will mentor right out of your company. You will help them acquire the skills they need to succeed. And when you do that and you celebrate their success, you have just taught everybody else in the team that you care about their success.
And the loss of that message. Yeah. You got it.
And in respect for your time and for that of those that have joined us today, you have a book, and I'd like to take a couple minutes to talk about that. So for anyone that is looking to actually learn more deeply about the principles we've talked about today, Dancing with Disruption, I know that it's available both on Amazon.com and Amazon.ca as well for us Canadians, and that you can grab it there. And I do love the subtitle as well, right? Leading dramatic change during global transformation. And that's certainly something that we're going through so strongly right now. So maybe talk a little bit about the book.
Sure. So it just came out in March, and it just goes really deep on what I've observed around organizations and even governments trying to move people and seeing the successes and the failures. I do draw a fair bit on the pandemic because it was such a fantastic case study of trying to move an entire globe in a certain direction.
Yeah.
All of us went to bed one night and the next morning learned you got to wear a mask, you got to stand 6 feet apart, you got to sanitize like your life depends on it. And we're not joking about that. And so abruptly, our lives changed. What's interesting is while people don't want to talk about the pandemic, say the best thing you can do is look back and discover all the things you did to adapt. So Ken, you made a comment earlier, just very briefly, you talked about folks seeing change is hard. And one of the messages I try and give is it's not. In a lot of ways, we flex like that. We see a situation, we do something different. When we've got a detour, we make the left-hand turn, we move around it, and our day goes on. We're actually very, very good at change. So dancing with disruption is a skill a lot of us own, but we don't recognize it. So in here, I'm just trying to highlight what can leaders do to help people through really significant disruption.
Yeah, I really love what you say about sort of what is it, the old expression I think that ties into that is necessity becomes the mother of invention, right? And my wife is a retailer, and so all of that stuff with the masking and the sanitizer and the distance and everything else was a very difficult thing for her to navigate. People at
Right.
first couldn't even come into her store. So, talk about flexing, right? We set up an online store for her where we could do deliveries and curbside pickup in literally less than a week, right?
Right.
And that's thousands of products. That's a whole different way of doing things and engaging with customers. And it wasn't painful. It was a week, right?
Yeah,
uh,
one of the stats that came out was showing how dramatically IT departments within organizations enabled people to work remotely. They had to. They had to do it overnight or within a period of weeks, and they did. And you look at most IT projects, they're months and years long. And all of a sudden, we did this one within weeks. So it's quite the challenge and important to remind people. We talked about storytelling, telling the story about how folks rapidly pivoted and did that successfully and felt good about it. We need to be reminded of that.
Yeah, absolutely. What we're capable of, right? And I'm glad you said that, felt good about it because, as painful as it was, for her as a retailer to move through that, the lessons that she learned and some of I guess, the aftershock of what remains, right? That she now is a company that she wasn't before,
Right.
that ships product to people both in Canada and the US, right?
Right.
So fascinating. Hey, one other way that people can sort of access this, I noticed on your web page that not only can you access the book, but they can take the course. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So, it's one thing to read a book, but then you can only squeeze so much into a book. So, talking through some of these elements, looking at a case study, and having folks not only take the learnings from the book that are explained to them, but then apply it not only to the case study, but anything they want to bring to the table. That's what I'm looking to do with individuals that are interested. So, you see something good in the book, or maybe you don't like reading as much as hearing it. Let's get on live and talk through some of the concepts and see you actually apply it to change in the workplace.
I love it. And you can see very simply there that you can actually enter your information to get more information on this, and certainly recommend that for anyone that's looking to, actually embrace disruption and make that a part of their everyday, business lives, which I think they should. And listen, I cannot thank you enough for, joining us today, Jeff. It's been really great. I always love having another Canadian, but especially one that is embracing kind of disruption and helping people to navigate that to better their professional careers. And I got to think, their lives as well, right? So thank you.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Wes, and thank you, Ken.
Oh,
Yeah.
you were a great guest. It was nice to have you on today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And listen, obviously, to all of our viewers out there that took the time to join us today for another episode of Level Up Live, we cannot thank you enough. And as I always like to say, until next time, keep learning. And Ken,
Keep leveling up.
see you next Wednesday, everybody.